Welcome to the Nonprofit Alliance of Bermuda's Nonprofit Strategy and Planning Training. This training session, you will learn what nonprofits and their boards need to know before starting a strategic planning process. Our agenda for this training is in three parts. Part 1, Introduction to Nonprofit Strategy. Part 2, Introduction to Strategic Planning. And Part 3, Strategic Planning Phases. We'll begin with Part 1, Introduction to Nonprofit Strategy. In setting strategy, we want to achieve a flywheel effect proposed by Jim Collins, a researcher on business management in the book Good to Great. A flywheel, for those who may be like me, who are not mechanical, is a massive metal disc on a horizontal axle. Think of it like a wheel on a car. The task is to get the flywheel to move and complete a full rotation by pushing it. Then, at some point, the flywheel kicks into momentum. It takes over, and you no longer have to push. Its weight is working for you, and over time, an organization becomes stronger and stronger, creates greater impact in the community, and gains momentum. If any one of these components doesn't work well, you can always move backwards, lose momentum, and face setbacks, and then start all over again. Question: do you have any ideas on what the components might be for a nonprofit in a strategic flywheel? If a nonprofit strategy is like that roadmap to help you get to where you go and what you want to accomplish, what would help you to gain momentum? What should your strategy entail? There are 6 key areas that a nonprofit must consider if it is to create this strategic momentum. These areas have been adopted from the Balanced Scorecard strategic management tool to more specifically address the nonprofit context. They include impact, brand, revenue, operations, people, and governance. Let's look at these elements in further detail. Impact is the bottom line of the social sector and defines why social sector organizations exist and how they make a difference in the lives of their stakeholders and the larger community. Impact is a crucial first step for any organization's long-term sustainability. High-impact organizations encourage staff to consistently challenge their work and find new and better ways to serve their clients and stakeholders. This is about how you turn a problem into a sustainable solution and investing the time to really measure impact through a well-defined theory of change or logic model, as well as an evaluation plan. Evaluation is reinforced when everyone, not just program staff, embrace a culture of measurement for continuous improvement. Once you have demonstrated and modeled impact, how do you tell your story? That is your brand. Your brand stands out from the crowd. Increasingly, the importance of storytelling is required to help you communicate the work and impact of your organization, highlighting your unique value proposition. And this could include having a clear, succinct elevator pitch that everyone understands and knows. Your brand is about clarity of mission, purpose, and values, and being able to clearly and effectively communicate this to all stakeholders to build support and engagement in your mission. Your brand is about consistency across all your messaging and communications, so your message and purpose is clearly understood and reinforced. We often deprioritize marketing in the nonprofit space, and this detracts from our ability to achieve the momentum needed to move forward as a nonprofit. If you have high impact and tell your story well, revenue should flow more easily. Let's talk about revenue. To keep revenue coming, we need to also demonstrate strong financial planning and management, which includes and considers how to diversify funding, how to increase resources, and in some cases, may also consider social enterprise or revenue generating ventures. Of course, many of us will engage also in charitable events and grant writing. Next, in our nonprofit strategic framework, we shall consider the importance of people and operations. People and operations are the culture and internal functioning of the organization. People represent your talent management, leadership, and culture. Nonprofit should ask itself what is in place to ensure the satisfaction, growth, and performance of our people in doing and leading in our work. Talent acquisition and retention is challenging in nonprofits, especially when we are not always competitive with our pay. So planning helps to attract, keep, and motivate the people that are doing the work on our behalf. With respect to operations, high performance organizations consistently invest back in the organization for continuous improvement to grow all the necessary support functions such as IT and internal processes. The stronger your support functions, the faster and more seamlessly your organization can move. When social sector organizations become high impact as well as high performance, they are not only more sustainable, but they also create a culture that is better positioned to attract talent and donor dollars. High impact, high performance organizations are also bolstered by good governance, provided by a strong board that supports a culture of accountability, inclusiveness, transparency, and responsiveness. Nonprofits often do not have legal departments, risk management teams, or extensive financial or communications expertise. These types of skill sets can be provided through board support, ensuring a nonprofit can make well rounded decisions that incorporate a diversity of perspectives and are held accountable to plans and decisions. Taken together, all these elements create a flywheel effect where your organization becomes stronger over time and creates more impact in the community through its momentum. We strongly suggest any nonprofit strategy include priorities that cover each of these areas. Now let's look at some other key components of nonprofit strategy. Your strategy or executive summary should include the mission, vision, values, strategic goals, and supporting objectives for the next 3 years. It should succinctly capture and communicate in one page one goal with supporting objectives should be set for each of the 6 areas of the nonprofit strategic framework found in the flywheel, and it should be updated every 3 years. Your dashboard. Your dashboard should have KPIs or performance measurements for each objective, with one key indicator per objective at least. This may be updated also annually depending on the changing environment. Reporting to and monitoring by the board should also occur frequently, at least once a quarter. Your theory of change. This is the programmatic strategy or theoretical framework for how programs and services will create impact and make the change that your organization desires to make. This is distinct from the organizational strategy as a whole. It is refined during strategic planning to ensure alignment with the changing environment. Your financial plan. This is a high level of resources required to deliver the strategy. It will form the annual budget, but is distinct from annual budgeting. It supports long-term financial planning. Your action plan. This is a 1-year operational plan for implementing the strategy, which includes timelines and persons responsible. This also is updated annually. And finally, your strategic plan document. This is a consolidation of all the documents that includes the strategy, the theory of change, and your financial plan. It may also describe the strategic planning process and how it was followed, and some background information on the organization. It does not typically include the dashboard or action plan. Those items come later. Now let's look at the all-important area of impact. Your organization must consider how it will make impactful change. This is also called the theory of change, or can be known as a logic model or a strategy plan. In your strategy plan or map, you will have included your vision, your mission, your strategic priorities, your values, but more importantly, you will also have the opportunity or problem that your organization is trying to solve, the strategic priorities that you identify to solve those problems, what the outcomes of your strategic activities will generate, and the impact or the change that will be made once your organization undertakes the strategy that it has put in place. Here is an example of a dashboard. In this example, KPIs and targets are tracked, benchmarks are noted, and when and how benchmarks were achieved are also noted. This dashboard identifies by color those KPIs that are below target performance or underlying critical risk, that are narrowly missed or poorly trending in performance that may impact the end of year targets, and those that are on target for performance. Here's another example of a dashboard. In this example, the key components of the nonprofit framework or flywheel are used to record the measurement of the strategic objectives, the outputs, and the outcomes. The nonprofit strategic framework or flywheel that we will be referring throughout this training session is in alignment with the industry standard and common tool known as the Balanced Scorecard. The Balanced Scorecard is one of the most common strategic planning and management systems used to align day-to-day work with higher level strategy and monitor progress towards strategic goals. The reason it's called balanced is because it's looking at the strategic measures in addition to other key areas of running an organization, which includes customer satisfaction, learning and growth, finance, and internal processes. The concept of the Balanced Scorecard has evolved beyond the simple use of prospectus, and it's now a more holistic way of looking at strategy. Essentially, the elements of the Balanced Scorecard are roughly the same as the elements of the nonprofit strategic framework or flywheel. Instead of customer, which you'd have in the Balanced Scorecard, we look at impact. Instead of internal processes, we look at operations. Instead of learning and growth, we look at people. And rather than use the word finance, we refer to the word revenue. No matter which way you look at it, these are all a balanced way of managing the organization. A key benefit of using a disciplined framework is that it gives an organization a way to bring everything together. This brings alignment of meaning and shows a connection between everything the organization does, so that people who are working for or with or benefiting from the organization understand how all its elements come together. The measurements being used to track success, typically known as key performance indicators or KPIs, are the vehicles in which strategic objectives are analyzed and determine whether or not the organization is accomplishing its mission, vision, and strategy in alignment with the framework. The flywheel's description of governance focuses on the critical aspects of nonprofit sustainability. Its focus on impact looks at whether the organization is meeting the need of its clients and stakeholder groups. Its focus on brand looks at whether or not the organization is seen and known and visible. Its focus on revenue speaks to the organization's financial sustainability over time. And its focus on people is a recognition that it takes people, human resources, to make all of this happen. Whatever tool that is used, there is one common denominator. Organizations need a balanced strategy that addresses all key aspects of its work. Now, the use of the nonprofit framework will vary according to where you are. So the components will stay the same, but the strategic viewpoint will differ. You want to ensure your strategy supports sustainability by considering exactly where you are in your life cycle and what's going on in the current context and environment. You also want to take into account the perspectives of clients, staff, board members, and donors, and perhaps even other key stakeholders when gathering information about how you intend to make an impact. This is called strategic thinking. And strategic thinking is necessary throughout all areas of implementation of the strategic framework. So when you're thinking about strategy, an important lens to consider is the nonprofit life cycle. You want your strategy to be tailored to your life cycle phase and focus on moving you to the next level of maturity. If you are a startup, your strategy will likely look very different from a mature nonprofit. When we refer to a phase such as startup or adolescence, it's not about age but of maturity. So startups usually have a budget of under 250,000. They usually have, they start with a 1 to 2 year plan, whereas an adolescent organization can vary widely between the 3rd and the 6th year generally, and budgets are typically 250 to $1 million, and they generally are on a 3 to 5 year planning cycle. And then those who are mature are beyond 5 years, and they often operate at $1 million plus annual budget. And you can also, while you're going through the phases, face an area of decline or stagnating. And mostly this is about your capacity when it wanes, or when demands wane, or when morale wanes, or people leave. And this causes weakness in your leadership sometimes and in your organization. And it can contribute to major losses. Stagnation also can occur when complacency sets in within the organization, or when a well-developed management system inhibits flexibility or responsiveness. And you can also, if you're not in a stagnation phase, you can go into a decline phase or crisis phase, in which you are actually losing ground, losing donors, losing clients, losing staff, or some other form of crisis, perhaps due to the environment, whether it be physical, social, financial, etc. But overall, as you're considering the nonprofit strategy framework, how you're going to look at your organization, you must consider where you are. And that will look differently depending on what level of life cycle that you're in. Let's do a recap by way of a breakout discussion on what we've learned so far. If you're in a group, introduce yourselves again in your roles. Understand what colleagues you have at the table. And then share what life cycle you think your nonprofit is in, and to what extent a current strategy exists or plan, and whether or not that plan is currently guiding your organization. Welcome back. I hope that exercise was useful. Now that you've considered your life cycle, you also want to think about your strategy relative to your the current trends or the shifts that may be taking place in your current environment. What shifts or trends have you observed over the last 10 to 15 years? And how may that impact how you implement and draft your strategy today? Let's look at some shifts in trends in operating nonprofits. In the 20th century, it was popular to focus just on the mission, to have a donor model, to be program driven, to have organizations pull themselves up by their bootstrap, to avoid risk wherever possible and not to make any mistakes. In the 21st century, however, we've moved from mission focused to impact focused. Is our mission achieving what we set out to do? We've moved from a donor model to just asking for money mostly to an investor model, helping donors to grow with our organization, to learn what we do, and to make even further investment in our organizations by becoming a community partner with us to make the change. We've moved from program driven, have a problem, create a program that should solve it, to results driven. Is what we're doing meeting the need, making an impact? Can we demonstrate that we are effective? From a hand-to-mouth existence in the 20th century to looking at our long-term sustainability over time. And then being more entrepreneurial. That's a delicate balancing act. But over the years, in Bermuda in particular, we've seen the growth of charity shops. We've seen healthcare nonprofits provide medical services being reimbursed through insurers. We've seen charities provide retail outlets. So there are a number of ways that we are stepping outside of the box in order to be more impactful and more dynamic. In the 20th century, the key metric was doing good. And while that was well-intentioned and we were doing okay, wasn't necessarily strategic. We've moved to a place now of strategic thinking. The world has evolved. Donors have evolved. It used to be we were more in transactional relations. And now we are in investor, co-creator, co-collaborating relationships. These are important shifts. Other shifts not mentioned are technology, particularly after COVID-19. And we all can agree that technology is here to stay. We must embrace it. Bring people together. Use people and resources that have tech qualifications and experience. A lack of access or a failure to see the importance of technology will be a hindrance to our progress in the future. These are just some, not all, of the nonprofit trends and shifts that are taking place in our environment. More specifically, some of these shifts and trends in terms of impact include ensuring robust program logic and theory of change models, working upstream and downstream and addressing root causes, rebuilding trust in nonprofits through impact accountability, and being evidence-based. In terms of operations, building policies and procedures and the systems behind the work, exploiting technology, integrating AI, planning for cyber security threats. In terms of brand, utilizing marketing as a key lever, clarifying and aligning cross-brand marketing and communications, using storytelling in the terms of impactful communications about your organization, and the need to adequately invest in building a brand. In the area of people, navigating general shifts, considering the future work, including hybrid and 4-day work weeks, prioritizing mental health and self-care and burnout and secondary trauma, addressing that or taking it into consideration when managing staff, building a pipeline of equipped leaders for the next generation and for the sector. And then the area of revenue, sustainability through alternative revenue sources, improving donor cultivation, tailoring donor relation strategies, especially post the pandemic where things tend to be more hands-off and electronic when it comes to our donors. And then governance, re-engaging your brand in the mission as well as key governance issues, and considering mergers and acquisitions where you go into a crisis and a wind down may be necessary. Part 2, Introduction to Strategic Planning. Let's look at the video, Why Does Every Nonprofit Need a Strategic Plan? This video can be accessed via YouTube and is presented by Mandy Pierce, owner for Funding for Good. Question: what if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? Well, unfortunately, strategic planning doesn't just happen like that. Strategic planning requires time, collective thinking, asking key questions, starting out with curiosity and ending with clarity and momentum. And it produces an output that is exciting, or can be exciting, and realistic when you do it correctly. With respect to the strategic planning process, let's drill down a little more on what it requires. Time. Focus less on the plan itself and more about thinking strategically. Get perspective on how you are doing relative to the need and to others. To do collective thinking, create buy-in and alignment across your organization and the community. Think about key questions. What problem are we trying to solve? Why does it exist? Why does it persist? What strategies are most effective in solving the problem? What are others doing around us about the problem? What are our strengths? What are our challenges? What operational drivers matter most? How are we doing? What are our plans? What and our pain points, rather? What and how do we want to be different a year from now? And what milestones do we want to achieve? Are we moving in inches or are we moving in miles? And remember to start your journey with curiosity, wanting to build a better mousetrap, and with clarity and momentum. That's the best end state, the one that helps you create intentional, strategic movement toward your vision. Make sure that your output is exciting but also realistic. Your output should showcase an exciting future state. It should right size execution based on internal resources and external demand. It should identify some short term wins to gain momentum. It should define how to measure and monitor progress and how to adapt to changing contexts as they evolve. And so, in summary, strategic planning is a process to co-create a desired future by creatively identifying shifts needed in response to changes in the internal and external environment. It's an opportunity to clarify the purpose of your organization, where the organization wants to be in the future, how it's going to get there, and the resources needed to get it there. And remember, the strategic planning process does not end with the strategic plan. The plan must be reviewed. You must have a dashboard where you can monitor the plan frequently and measure results. You should also have an action and an operational plan that identifies how our organizational resources will be used to execute the strategy. There are also some key benefits to engaging in the strategic planning process. In addition to the focus and the alignment that it will bring in producing effective operations and providing direction, strategic planning also helps to build strong teams within the board and staff. It helps to enhance satisfaction and meaning among teams because they perceive their clear contribution and value for the efforts. It helps to solve major problems, complex problems sometimes in the organization. It helps to improve the image and credibility of the nonprofit because it is well focused and it's well organized. And also it helps to improve the condition for clients. After all of this work is done, when we've thought through how to impactfully structure our programs, because we're more focused. And being more focused, we have a better opportunity to be more effective. Your strategic planning approach will depend on where you are as an organization. Some processes used to determine what approach to take will depend on your organization's size, culture, complexity, level of change needed, life cycle, and the time that you have available for planning. Some common strategic approaches used are issue-based, conventional light, bridge, standard conventional, and turnaround. Let's delve into these approaches a little more, going from the least intense to the most. Issue-based action planning is when you're planning amidst a rapidly changing environment and there are major internal issues to address with limited resources. This approach looks inside the organization to identify and diagnose critical issues and generally takes 6 months to 1 year of action planning. The bridge plan focuses on extending existing strategic plan that you may already have in place, created when uncertainty in future funding or leadership exists, and a new strategic plan is not yet plausible. It requires review of results of your existing plan as well as new areas to include. The conventional light plan focuses on stability, either in operations or transitions. It's created when an organization is in a startup typically or has a limit to growth due to operational and or staffing constraints, and it generally looks at a 1 to 2 year time frame with basic goals and a to-do list for that time frame. A conventional plan is a standard way of doing planning. It focuses on growth, either in programming or geography, and generally spans across a 3 to 5 year time frame. So that's not the planning process. That's the time that the plan will be put in place by the organization. It's created when an organization or community needs to go to the next level. It requires operational elements to be relatively stable and mature, and usually organizations are in the adolescence to maturity phase during this process. And it requires community assessment of need. A turnaround plan, on the other hand, it focuses on continuity, right-sizing mission with financials, created when an organization has hit the decline phase and is in that form of the life cycle, and it needs to shift to swift action. It requires competitive and community assessment, and it typically involves more stakeholders. We're going to have another breakout discussion, and if you're by yourself, you're going to reflect, and if you're with your colleagues, you're going to include them in on this discussion. Given the life cycle your nonprofit is in, what approach to planning would be most suitable? Do you think, based on what we've talked about, what would be most suitable for your organization, and what would be most practical? Welcome back. We're now going to look at criteria for success in the process, in the strategic planning process. This process involves strategic thinking. It involves participatory discussion. It involves consensus in decision making as much as possible. Decisions should include a critical examination of strategic issues. People are to be engaged. They are to be felt as though they're being listened to. They're to be invited to contribute. And in this way, they are motivated about the final plan, to be a part of the final plan. This is important to the success of your strategic planning process. You want to avoid disengagement by not making the process more cumbersome than it absolutely has to be in terms of people's time, energy, and the resources that are being used. And you want a collaborative approach that results in buy-in, commitment, and ownership from both staff, board, and the leadership overall of the organization. Other criteria for success in strategic thinking. Remember, process is important as the plan. The process must include strategic discussion. It must focus on the entire organization. It must be produced based on consideration of potential changes internally and externally. It must be future focused. It will have influence on governance and leadership, remember that. And it often involves extensive use of the organization's resources, so be sure to plan wisely when entering into a strategic planning process. It involves critical thinking on issues that affect the organization, its future, and how it accomplishes its purpose and priorities. Strategic thinking should involve asking and reflecting on the hard questions. Success factors in terms of this decision-making process. Strategic thinking should be based on consensus decision-making. That's often the best. Voting is the second best. Full consensus takes more time, but there are trade-offs. If you don't have full consensus, you may not get full buy-in. Authoritative decision-making will not maximize buy-in and should be avoided. Criteria for success in the plan. It should have a clearly defined and articulated purpose with strategic goals and accompanying one-year action plan or year-to-year action plan and financial plan. It should be realistic. Shouldn't be overly complex or overly ambitious. Should be flexible and should include mechanisms for monitoring and adjustment so plans can be adopted as needed. And make sure that you use the strengths to take advantage of opportunities and address weaknesses to mitigate threats while you're strategic planning. Your plan should be future-oriented. It should be forward-thinking while also addressing current priority issues. So who participates in a strategic planning process? To maximize buy-in, you should involve board and staff in some way. Not all people involved are involved or have to be involved in all stages of the planning process. There should be a planning committee, and that will help to make the process more manageable for the board. The role of the planning committee is important. The planning committee makes processes more manageable for the rest of the board. Now, it's not to write the plan, but help customize and advise on the planning process. Its functions to select the facilitator, to instruct the facilitator, to create the action plan for planning processes, monitor the process, to decide on decision-making methods. This is the role of the planning committee. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some important activities of the committee. Here's how the various key members of the board and the process can be involved in the planning process. The ED can point out who will play a key role in the strategy and who should be included in addition to the board chair. And also the ED can assist in determining who within the staff should be involved at what levels. Experienced board members can be on the planning committee. Someone who can be trusted to bring back the information, who can speak on behalf of the board. There should also be someone who is good at process administration if you have them on hand, as well as someone must chair this committee and be ultimately responsible for the process. Now we're going to speak to the planning facilitator. It's very helpful to have a planning facilitator that is not engaged in the planning work, but facilitates the things that need to be done. Typically, it's an external consultant that is hired by the organization, but it can also be someone internally. Professionals who are equipped to facilitate can be beneficial, especially if you haven't gone through a strategic planning process before or your previous planning wasn't successful. An external facilitator helps to play a neutral role in managing different perspectives. Ideally, the facilitator is skilled with nonprofit strategic planning experience. They also have facilitation skills and experience. It should not be the ED. The ED works closely with the facilitator around the planning processes. However, the ED should be a participant in the planning process rather than facilitating the administration of it. What skills should the facilitator have, you may ask? Well, according to McNamara,
The facilitator should be able to train the committee on the process. They should be able to help customize the process. They should have skills to ignite strategic thinking and inclusive discussion. They should know how to manage a group and the group dynamics and how to resolve group conflicts. Make no mistake about it, strategic planning is a process, and it's a process to be facilitated. It does not always require expert consultants, but at times additional expertise may be needed. For example, market researchers to confirm the need for programs and services, or industry-based professionals for aspects of the plan, for example, an expert on trends, or maybe even a financial expert. Thanks for following us along. We've now reached part 3 of our session, the strategic planning phases. As mentioned, strategic planning is a process, and there are phases: the readiness and planning phase, the situation analysis phase, determining your purpose, setting out your strategic goals and objectives, your action plan, your financial plan, your final document, and then finally, implementing, monitoring, and adjusting, documenting how you will do that with your completed plan. The order of the phases. You always want to start with assessment, planning, and then your situation analysis. There's no one right order to progress through. Conventional approach typically includes all of the phases. Issue-based just looks at issues and action planning for those issues, as an example. So let's break it down even further. Readiness. What is it? Nonprofits must be ready for the planning process. It's not something that you rush through. The process is what matters. Key issues to consider during the readiness phase. Do we have enough money? Do we have confidence that we have the capacity to implement? Is there a lot of cynicism around the planning process already? Are we only doing a plan because the funder has asked us for it? Can members of the board and staff work together? Are we expecting turnover in key leadership positions during this time? Can staff and the board commit the time? And if strategic planning is rushed as just a checkbox exercise, it will be a waste of time. So you want to make sure your organization is ready. One of the key first phases of strategic planning is the situation analysis, understanding your current state. It involves a document review typically. It looks inside your organization, but it also looks outside what's going on in your organization's ecosystem. And it involves some form of research and or needs assessment. Document review can involve looking at your past strategic plans, your annual reports, your evaluation results, your fund development plan, your financials, your budget, your board committee plans, your staff satisfaction surveys, and your internal process checklist. The idea is for all the areas of the flywheel, you want to see where you already have data and input and where your organization rests currently as a result of the programming that it's doing right now. In terms of a situation analysis, which is usually done on the inside, you'll start with a formal organization assessment. And as a best practice, to use it as an objective and a credible tool to identify strengths and weaknesses. That's what this internal examination can do. Where do we, what's going on with us? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where do we need areas of improvement? This is what the situation analysis will do. It will also consider existing beneficiaries and staff satisfactions, as well as program and evaluation results. Now let's talk about the situational analysis externally. An external situation analysis confirms the current needs and levers for change. It should generate a list of opportunities and threats. For example, the PESTLE framework can be used during this phase of the analysis, looking at the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors. The situation analysis, when conducted externally, can examine best practices and future trends of the field. It can consider key stakeholder perspectives, especially beneficiaries and donors, and it should consider what competitors and collaborators are doing. In an external situation analysis, both primary and secondary research can be used in order to determine what is going on within your current context, nationally or internationally. During your discussion of the final situation analysis and its findings, have the hard discussions about what the research and data is telling you. Be sure to include your staff and your board. Come to a consensus on top priorities that have been identified through your SWOT analysis. What are the strengths your organization needs to capitalize on? What are the opportunities to pursue? What are the weaknesses that need to be addressed? And what are the threats that need to be mitigated? The most commonly used tool to conduct an organizational audit is the SWOT analysis, and this is often used during the strategic planning process. What are the benefits of a SWOT analysis? Well, it considers your strengths. Specifically, what do you, your organization, or the programs of your organization do better than anyone else? Do you have key intellectual property or relationships? In terms of your opportunities, where are the good opportunities that are facing you? What are the interesting trends you're aware of? Are your clients asking for additional services? Are your funders wanting you to expand? In terms of weaknesses, what could you improve? What do others do better than you? What inhibits your ability to achieve success? What are your pain points? Reference your threats. What obstacles do you face? What are other nonprofits doing that you should be worried about? What are funders doing that you should be worried about? This exercise is critical once you have collected your situational analysis data to get your planning team and your board together to look at the data collected and then to consider what strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats have emerged as a result of the review of your analysis. So when focusing on the purpose of your organization, you want to focus on your vision, mission, and values. Your vision describes your desired future world state. It's usually bigger than yourself. It's most remembered when it's aspirational and it's succinct and it's a vision that requires others. Your mission is unique to your organization. It describes what your organization exists for, its priorities, and its methods in accomplishing the vision. It should be easy to memorize and action oriented. Your values describe the organization's fundamental beliefs and guiding principles that drive its culture. These should be power statements or phrases that are easily put into action. Another area of the strategic planning process involves identifying strategic goals and objectives. And remember, you want strategic goals and objectives for your impact, for your brand, your intended revenue, operations, people, and governance. Now let's look at examples of strategic objectives with respect to impact. Are we going deep or are we going wide? Objectives can include core programs such as services of an organization pulled directly from the theory of change. It can improving client satisfaction, monitoring client performance through data-driven culture. Or a brand objective. It can look at increasing positive storytelling of impact to the community, increasing influence through media mentions, increasing social media followers. Or a revenue objective, improving diversity of revenue or improving donor acquisition. Or, by way of example, operations and culture objectives, creating a facilities management plan, conducting technology upgrades, improving employee engagement and retention, and building bench strength for internal growth and succession pipeline. And while you are creating these objectives, remember to keep them SMART. When establishing objectives, also remember to establish a dashboard with KPIs, key performance indicators. For each strategic area, identify the KPIs that the board will monitor to be able to track progress towards successful implementation of the objective. Here are some examples of KPI. For revenue, for example, gifts secured, governance, board meeting attendance rates, brand, website page views, culture, employee volunteer retention rates, operations, maintenance cost per square foot, impact, changes in knowledge, skills, and abilities, behaviors among beneficiaries. Please reach out to us at the Alliance if you desire a copy of this presentation so that you can look at these dashboard KPIs more closely. Now we're going to look at some dashboard samples. You'll notice in this dashboard that KPIs and targets are identified as well as benchmarks for the year and the quarter in which they are to be measured. This dashboard also shows areas that are below target, narrowly missed, or on target. Your dashboard acts as a guide to tracking where you are versus where you want to be. Here's another dashboard sample. This one shows the strategic objective for the flywheel component of branding and governance. The strategic objective is listed, and then the KPIs are noted underneath. In addition to your dashboard, you will need to create a one-year action operational plan. Your action plan should include for each objective an established action to operationalize, associate deadlines, persons responsible, and resources needed for each objective. You must identify who will monitor implementation. This is often done by staff or board subcommittees versus using the entire board. For example, the use of a planning committee. In addition to your action plan, you will need to create a financial plan and a budget. Consider resources needed in action planning, determine the time frame for the financial plan, consider the additional revenues and expenses required, and this can be created in a subgroup also versus using the entire board, for example, through a finance subcommittee. Once your strategic plan and your associated plans are finalized, it is time to socialize your final document. That means to share your plan internally, to share it externally, to let communities know your mission, vision, and values, to let current and potential donors know of your goals and successes, and to let collaborators and community leaders know of your programs. Once you begin implementing your plan, you'll have to have a monitoring plan. This is necessary to ensure plans don't just sit on a shelf. Plans must be monitored and built on a process for iteration. They must have a formal process that documents the changes and the reasons for changes, any changes that you may make. They must have board approval and then recirculated and communicated out to stakeholders. Remember to celebrate successes and milestones while monitoring, and also to continue to think strategically. Strategic thinking and planning are never done. Have a formal timeline for monitoring implementation, i.e. 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months. So now that we've gone through the complete planning process, here's what strategic planning is not. It is not an operational plan, or a fund development plan, or a marketing and communications plan, or a program or service plan. It's not a business plan. It's not work plans. These are all the work of the executive director, and they must support the team and the strategic plan, and they should flow directly from that plan. So you may be wondering, what does it take? How much commitment and time is necessary? And what should the planning schedule look like, given all that we've learned about strategic planning? Commit to at least 12 to 15 hours of meeting. Make room for additional research that has to be done. It's good to have at least one full day of off-site retreat. Schedule planning meetings 2 to 3 weeks apart. Establish all dates in the first meeting. Determine the best time of day to maximize involvement. And between meeting homework is critical to maximize efficiency. Here's what a sample strategic planning time frame could look like. In the first month, kick-off meetings, review critical materials, conduct board and staff surveys, develop key research questions, determine appropriate feedback mechanisms. The deliverables from this are project plan, community norms or terms of reference, regular updates, key research questions, and survey findings. Month 2 to 4, conduct secondary research of best practices, conduct survey and/or focus group of clients, and interview stakeholders. Deliverables include a project summary, interview list, working sessions, primary research findings, and secondary research findings, and of course, a bibliography of sources. Month 5 includes developing presentations with insights and themes, synthesizing findings into recommendations, conducting the retreat, developing a one-page visual about the plan, and assisting with the dashboard. Deliverables include recommendations, retreat agenda, final strategic plan, and the final dashboard. And then post-planning. Post-planning looks at assisting with the implementation of key strategies. Deliverables can include orientation and project planning, as well as monitoring and evaluation. The phases of strategic planning are orientation and project planning, internal and external discovery and analysis, development of the plan, and implementing any adjustments or assistance that are needed post-planning. How to use the information that we are sharing with you today. You're welcome to use any of these phases or designs in your RFP process for a strategic planning facilitator. Understand the commitment that strategic planning requires, and be sure that you and your organization are ready. Consider how your nonprofit engages in ongoing strategic thinking and planning already, and optimize on those opportunities to execute the strategic planning that you currently are undertaking. Strategic planning is a process, it's not an event. Do strategic planning, not instrumental planning. There is a place for blue sky thinking, but ensure that you're also being realistic. This presentation has been compiled by a number of online resources. Please refer to our reference page for the resources that have been used. You're welcome to click on any of the links to find this material directly. Thank you for being a part of this nonprofit strategic planning training session. We hope the information has been helpful. Remember that big changes can be made by a small group of dedicated people. Let this be your mantra as you engage in a formative process to grow your organization and, most importantly, to meet the needs of the population that you serve. The Nonprofit Alliance of Bermuda is here to help you with your strategic planning needs. We hope this information has been helpful. If you need further information or support from us, please feel free to reach out at admin@nonprofitalliance.bm. In the meantime, we wish you the best. Think strategically to plan effectively. Bye for now.